Bittensor has become quite the topic this past month, and given that we're one of the few channels on YouTube to be somewhat covering Bittensor, I feel we should address these things to see if they actually hold weight or not. There's two things in specific I'm referring to. The first is the launch of a new project called BasedAI and how some are saying it will displace TAO, and the more recent event being the FUD attack by Eric Wall basically saying TAO should go to zero. And to make my position clear of where I stand, yes, I am very bullish and long TAO. It is my biggest altcoin bag for this cycle tied with Solana, and my highest conviction play in the AI category of crypto. For that to be the case, I'd obviously have to think TAO is quite the amazing product, and I do. I'm hoping I can hit a 100x on it this cycle, which is quite the task, but there is a small chance it happens. That being said though, I have absolutely zero loyalties to Bittensor. If during this very moment something were to come out about TAO that'd make me bearish, I'd have absolutely no problem dumping every single token within a second. It would hurt a bit because it'd be a substantial hit on what I was hoping for in my performance this cycle, but you have to accept when you're wrong. But given the recent FUD attacks and the fact that I've said nothing about it until now, it should be clear that with whatever's occurred I wasn't the slightest bit worried. For context, Eric Wall on March 19th dropped quite an extensive argument on why Bittensor in essence is vaporware, highlighting that subnet 1 text prompting is redundant and doesn't work, and why TAO should therefore go to zero. I will leave a link to Jacob Robert Steve's Twitter in the description where he tries to clarify a lot of these technicals, especially with Martin Shkreli, who doubled down on the TAO FUD, and as well as Mog Machine Spaces for a fantastic introduction to Bittensor. I can't sit here and get into the nitty-gritty aspects of Bittensor, I'll leave it to the experts. I'm frankly more so on the side of are my bags affected and has my investing thesis been spoiled, which as you can tell by my tone is not the case. In fact, it's likely the complete opposite. You see, FUD attacks aren't actually a bad thing and is quite frankly what you should expect as the project goes up in value and starts getting mass attention. I'm actually surprised it took TAO this long. I almost feel like opinions on Bittensor in both the bullish but especially bearish tone were little to none. But finally we got it, and what that does is create reaction. If the FUD ends up being right, then the reaction would be a substantial rug on price. But conversely, if the FUD can be negated, it creates a powerful force to the upside. Bittensor has been accumulating now for over 50 days. The last time it did this it ranged for 70 days before a 100% move from peak to peak, meaning TAO either way was going to make a substantial move upward. But with this FUD, if it does get neutralized, it's a recipe for an even more violent move upward once this finally does break. Wiz has a similar vision, saying TAO could snap to 2500 on its next move up. Regardless of if we get it this soon, you now have this idea on lock. But why do I feel this FUD can be shaked off? While aside from the fact that Eric is wrong, where even if we were to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he's right, he then has another 31 subnets after to dismiss. I think this stems from something else, the fact that Eric missed the bottom of TAO. This isn't an assumption, he said it himself verbatim. Back on December 3rd he tweeted this, the fact he was waiting for a dip on TAO before it ripped hundreds of % in his face. Where also in November he was calling TAO a meme coin at $130 as pointed out by Wolves Capital. So could it be as simple as that? I feel like this isn't a one-off situation. From the personal conversations I've had, I do know that a lot of people are put off by TAO simply because of how it came out of nowhere. If you don't see why that matters, let me explain. Of the top 100 cryptocurrency, the only assets to have had a fair value launch that are still relevant besides Bitcoin and Dogecoin are Kaspa and Bittensor. Conveniently two projects that seem to be doing very well on paper but get little to no coverage by many of these big crypto personnel. And to be fair, why would they? Normally crypto have pre-distributions like to the team and public sales. There's pre-mines that occur. Many of your favorite crypto YouTubers or Twitter accounts are well in the know before a project launches, which they have the opportunity to get for dirt cheap a lot of the time. Bittensor was not one of them, meaning it was a play you'd have to go out of your way to discover, actually apply those skills if you had them at all. A lot of these people got exposed, and now that project seems to be a true candidate for being the biggest project in the biggest category this cycle. So you know what? I'd be quite mad too. I totally get why Kyle Samani would consistently be calling Bittensor bad when Multicoin Capital was the biggest lead investor back in 2018 to guess who? rndr, the biggest competitor to being the #1 AI coin. I'm just calling a spade here. I love rndr, it's my second biggest AI bag. And back to Shkreli, yes, this guy, is also someone who I'd expect wouldn't want TAO to get out of hand, because if so his startup needs may find it quite difficult to succeed. Point is Eric dunking on TAO like he called this dip from here when in reality he called it here where it's back above already. And Shkreli calling on an actual AI engineer to review Bittensor where he then ends up saying wait, you know what, I'm actually interested in what this is FUD I'm not too worried about. And one more thing, I see many saying Eric and Kyle called Terra Luna before the collapse, which is indeed impressive. But the most prominent person to call that collapse, the one that comes to mind, is Algo Trading, and he's all in on TAO. I may be mistaken, but I do believe he converted all his ETH into TAO, and that he's 80% in Bittensor, calling it his highest conviction play, where he too started off quite pessimistic before going all in. To conclude the FUD, I wouldn't be too worried. But now let's move on to BasedAI, and how this project can supposedly be better than Bittensor. Remember, Bittensor wants to incentivize AI models built from scratch in a decentralized way, which is an absolutely insane idea, by the way. To put it into perspective, it's akin to Bitcoin coming out and saying I want to decentralize money. You'd have laughed that off and paid no attention to it. But that thesis also translated into this idea of all or nothing. If Bitcoin ended up doing that, it'd be at infinity. But if it didn't, it'd go to zero. There was never an in-between. And now with the institutionalization of Bitcoin and its greater acceptance each and every day, it seems like BTC is slowly but surely heading toward that infinity mark. I feel similarly about whoever decentralizes artificial intelligence. Whoever does so sufficiently will go to infinity, the rest will die. Even Jim Fan, a head research analyst at Nvidia, was fond of this idea back in 2023, referencing a direct Bittensor remark. Bittensor right now has an enormous first mover advantage, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll win. In fact, objectively speaking, Bittensor has a much greater likelihood to fail than succeed. That said, I still see it as a viable investment this bull market, because this idea alone should make it a vessel to receive tens of billions in valuation. It's just a matter of the bid at this point, as everything else in my opinion is fine-tuned for exactly that. As you can imagine, regardless of how great a head start TAO has, that was never going to prevent others from having a crack at this vision. Even OpenAI are trying to do something incredibly similar in this reward-based system. But in terms of crypto projects, BasedAI is the first legitimate competition thus far, where I believe many more to be rolling out fairly soon. One of the main advocates of Based is Kyle Chasse, and I actually do like Kyle, but one thing he keeps referencing is his contact of the Based creators, which goes back to what we were saying originally, how with Bittensor there was no team per se to even get in contact with, they just straight up launched. And more importantly, how this BasedAI team keeps reiterating they're better than TAO, how they fix a lot of its problems. But you see, that's the first big issue. Anyone saying Bittensor is better than BasedAI, and especially those saying Based is better than Bittensor, have in my opinion completely lost the plot. They're revealing their cards, they're showing they don't really quite know what's happening here. It'd be the same thing as saying something is better than Bitcoin. That doesn't quite make sense. How can something be better than Bitcoin? It doesn't matter if Litecoin or Bitcoin Cash have certain things over Bitcoin like faster transactions or lower fees. Bitcoin is the one the masses chose, the one that's garnered network effects. I think with this decentralized AI war it's going to be something similar. Whoever the masses choose, except this time it's specifically those with resources. I think of Greg Osuri and Akash Network. Greg is big on Bittensor. He recently stated it's the orchestration layer for AI. Akash Network is now providing decentralized compute on subnet 27 on Bittensor. So my question is, where does the better come in? Because in this context, better would only apply if Greg and Akash Network were to switch their commitment of resources from Bittensor to BasedAI, which of course could happen. But why could it happen? The BasedAI founders keep saying we're better than TAO. We've improved on the flaws of TAO. Okay, but what does that mean? It's up to those with the resources and programs to choose Based over Bittensor. Will opsec drop their TAO validator? Will TAO of subnet 8, creating an absolute monster in financial forecasting, choose to switch their thesis? Will Based provide a better incentive to create and train open source models? They very well could, but I wouldn't be as sure as they are. I believe a reason they give is that BasedAI has 1024 brains to the 32 subnets of TAO. But it's basic knowledge that TAO 2 will eventually go to 64 and then 128 to eventually 1024 subnets, and beyond. I do agree that the first doesn't always win. I believe Kyle stated this too, that the first trailblazes a sector, but the iterations that come soon after often improve on the first and win. I do know BasedAI has some things going for it, and Bittensor is far from perfect, but to be speaking in those absolutes for a project that hasn't even launched yet I think is immature. And here's my 2 cents. I don't think the future of decentralized artificial intelligence will be an ERC20, and I don't think it'll be linked to a meme coin. Smash that like and subscribe button if you made it this far. You're clearly not choosing rich if you don't. Sign up to an exchange link below for cheap fees and big bonuses. And I'll catch you all next time.